So now, moving on, our next point is quite a burning issue in several of our member states. A year ago, at our 20th session, there was a motion for the resolution on the role of intermediate authorities in building Europe, and that was tabled by Mr. Emilio Verrengia, the head of the Italian delegation. The Bureau charged the Governance Committee with the follow-up to this motion, and Mr. Verrengia was appointed as a rapporteur for the report which is currently being prepared on the subject. In February in Brussels, the rapporteur and the expert met with the European Confederation of Local Intermediate Authorities, CEPLI, for an exchange of views on the subject. The president of the CEPLI was hoping to be with us today, but unfortunately cannot make it. However, Mr. Marino Fiasella is a member of the organisation, also a member of the Congress, and will speak instead. The motion also calls for the Congress to launch a debate on the issue, and that's what we're doing now. The exchange and debate that we have today will feed directly into the report and to the resolution and recommendations. We will have to look into the possible impact of any reforms and changes, not only for the intermediate authorities themselves, but also for the municipalities below and the regions, of course, applicable where above as well. So can I first of all give the floor, I'm very pleased to give it to Mr. Emilio Verrengia. Mr. Verrengia, as I've said, heads the Italian delegation to the Congress. He's got great experience of dealing with intermediate levels of government. And the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes. Emilio, please.
Thank you very much, President. And thank you in particular for the kind words of introduction to this issue of intermediate levels of government. Of course, when we talk about intermediate levels of government, it concerns not only Italy, but I think it's an item on the political agenda, in fact, of almost all our governments in the UK, in Europe, rather. I'm glad that we have talked about the role of intermediate levels of government when it comes to growth in Europe. This is something that we discussed, in fact, already last year. And the Congress decided to take up this issue, in that in a number of countries there was a discussion on what intermediate levels of government could be doing in terms of growth. As far as my report is concerned, and in fact I talked about the ideas that will go into the report when the Governance Committee met earlier. So it is going to be an item on our agenda. But I would like to have this opportunity, to take this opportunity of sharing my ideas on the role of intermediate levels of government here with you, so that I can then go on to flesh out these ideas in my report. As I was saying earlier, in a number of countries in Europe, we have seen reform processes underway, reforms introduced. Many of them will have an impact on intermediate levels, and in fact some of these reforms would imply doing away with intermediate or second-tier levels of government, or clipping their wings to a very large extent. So I think it's important that we have this debate at this particular point in time. because we are discussing it here in the House, the organisation that symbolises democracy in the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. But I think we're already seeing violations or breaches of the European Charter of Local Self-Government if you look at the role of second-tier levels of government. Now, the Charter of Local Self-Government is something that almost all our countries have signed up to. Cities, regions, provinces in the van when it comes to democracy. That's the title, and I think we cannot just sit idly by as these reforms are carried out and just do away with second-tier levels of government just in order to square public finances. No, I think we've got to see the role of intermediate levels of government as part of a dynamic when it comes to public finances or public resources. Now, the brochure talks about intermediate levels of government being a cornerstone when it comes to the democratic edifice. But I think we're seeing breaches in respect of Articles 2 and 3 of the European Charter of Local Self-Government when it comes to the responsibility of elected bodies and decision-making bodies that are situated closest to the citizen. So there, I think already we're seeing disregard, if you like, of certain principles or breaches of principles such as that of subsidiarity, because intermediate levels of government are levels representing the interests of citizens, levels often that are closest to the citizen. If I can turn now to the debate that's taking place in Italy, but a similar debates taking place in Spain, in France, in Belgium, in Romania. I think we're seeing inroads being made into democracy as expressed by second-tier levels of government, and of course it's that level of administration and government that represents the citizens. They're not representing the interest of political parties or lobby groups, but rather the direct expression of the interest of citizens. And in that respect, I would like to thank the Congress for the monitoring work that's being done. Italy, in the sort of first days of November, was the subject of a monitoring exercise carried out by the Congress. We welcome this monitoring exercise.
Peculiarità che sono state emerse nel rapporto della delegazione.
And in the report that's been produced by the monitoring committee, attention has been drawn to this rather particular situation which prevails in Italy, and it's being brought to the attention of the Italian government. But I think we need to take prompt action in November. There was talk of doing away with second-tier levels of administration. Then there was this amendment that was introduced. And the situation of 7 provinces in that respect is somewhat uncertain. But we are indeed grateful to the monitoring committee for having embarked upon this monitoring exercise, and hopefully its conclusions will be produced speedily before the second half of the year. I don't want to dwell in too much detail on the situation in Italy, but 7 regions in Italy have taken cases to the Constitutional Court on the unconstitutional nature of the elimination of first and second levels of government, or substantial reductions in their competences. So we're talking about the majority, if you like, of regions in Italy have taken the case to the Constitutional Court. Friuli Venezia Giulia, for example, is an important region in that respect, and has joined in the appeals of the Constitutional Court against these reforms on constitutional grounds. But of course, reforms are afoot in a number of countries throughout Europe, and I think we have got to perhaps analyse the situation or the competences of intermediate levels of government, their roles, responsibilities. Of course, those roles and responsibilities will differ from one country to another, but they're important in terms of multi-level governance in Europe and an important vehicle in terms of expression of the interests and the needs of citizens. As the President was saying in his introduction, we have received considerable support, in particular from Mr. Vanucci, Mrs. Cagnolata, who have been assisting us in drafting the report. There are 11 countries, delegations making up the CEPLI, which is European Confederation of Local Intermediate Authorities, and as I say, we have received support from that confederation. As far as the provinces are concerned, they have important responsibilities when it comes to schools, housing, the environment, road building, public services. Also, within the provinces in Italy, there are certain public safety issues that are within the remit of the provinces, but I think it has to be said that the provinces really are close to the citizen and have considerable responsibilities halfway between the municipalities and the regions. I do hope that the report to be put shortly before the Congress meets with the broad support of the Congress of Local Regional Authorities, bearing in mind the reform processes that are being introduced. As I say, there is a risk certainly going down the wrong path. Let us hope that democracy wins out, citizen participation, but also public services. Let's hope they win out. Essential services, schools, education, social services, road maintenance, for example. We can't delegate that to some remote body. It can't legislate. It cannot deal with daily emergencies as they arise within our provinces, within our intermediate levels of government. And it's for that reason that we need to put this item fairly and squarely on the agenda. And I think within the report we'll be able to flesh out these ideas, and I'll conclude straight away, President, but I think it's important that the Congress, an important body as it is, ensure that this item remain on the agenda and that it be brought to the attention, the wider attention of all our governments. We're talking about democracy, therefore we shouldn't bear in mind just the costs, but also the services that we're making available and we're delivering to citizens on the part of directly elected representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. VERRENGIA, for that introduction. I am now very happy to welcome Mr. Mircea COSMA, who will intervene not only as the President of the Prahova County Council in Romania, but also on behalf of the Commission for Citizenship, Governance, Institutional and External Affairs, commonly referred to as the Civics Committee of the Committee of the Regions. Mr. COSMA is also a former member of the Congress and certainly was involved in a number of activities towards the successful implementation of Congress initiatives, particularly in the field of cultural and historical elements of regionalism, and that was always an asset for the Congress when you were a member. The departmental level is at present, of course, under discussion within your own country in Romania, so we're going to listen very carefully to your contribution to our debate on this subject, and you're very welcome, and the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je me réjouis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to be here to speak about the role of local and intermediate authorities in Europe, as well as to present the view of the Committee on Regions presented by Chairperson on the role of intermediate authorities in multi-level governance. Now, in accordance with the agreement of cooperation between the Community of Regions and the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, the Council of Europe reviewed in 2009 the main goal of this cooperation in order to ensure reciprocal support by these two institutions in their efforts to contribute to progress of local democracy and regional democracy, decentralization and local autonomy in Europe, and to guarantee respect by national and European authorities of local competences and regional competences, as well as to promote and strengthen together the concrete effects for good governance at various levels in Europe and beyond. Governance, multi-tier governance, is a flexible way of governance and a participatory way that strengthens the values of the European Union and its ethic. And its values of responsibility and solidarity in order to cope with the realities of a globalized world, increasingly globalized, interdependent and competitive. It could be considered as the best way to ensure that overall European interests prevail, interests of member states and local authorities. In the European context, international context, multi-tier governance has to be closely associated with the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity with respect to authority of different levels of power, with respect to governance, multi-tier governance highlights their interactivity. An intelligent regulation has to go hand in hand with the easing of bureaucracy and administrative burden, not only on citizens but also on local and regional authorities, hence rejecting a purely quantitative approach to regulations. Now, for the Committee of Regions, it's very important that the European Commission, the legislative bodies and national governments pay more attention to local and regional authorities when they design legislation, when they evaluate its impact, or elaborate the means to implement political goals and priorities in both the national and European context. The Committee of Regions aims at facilitating the active participation by local and regional authorities in the lawmaking political process at the European level in an ex-ante phase prior to a legislative or political proposal, through participation in impact assessment exercises, through participation in consultations of stakeholders, but also in the decision-making phase through an active role by the Committee of Regions. These provisions have to be seen in the framework of cooperation between the Committee of Regions and the European Commission. Now, what is important for the Committee of Regions is to underscore the contribution that intermediate levels could provide to good governance both at the national and at the European levels. Indeed, the Committee of Regions intends to carry out a kind of monitoring or evaluation on an annual basis of the degree of regionalization and decentralization within the European Union in order to develop an assessment of the dynamics towards a political, legal and fiscal authority of local and regional authorities. This can be done in partnership with the Congress. The Committee of Regions has already begun examining the distribution of authority in the member states of the European Union and in the countries of the expansion of the European Union, and this could be the first step in this more general process. Now, in addition, the Committee of Regions intends to develop a European Union Charter of Governance, multi-tier governance, that should lead to greater participation by local and regional authorities in the exercise of European democracy. Would be based on an inclusive and participatory concept, and it's the process of developing this principle should be based on the notion of its appropriation by local and regional authorities. Now, this was the message that the chairperson of the Committee of Regions wanted to send to you, and I have had the honor of conveying this message in partnership with European institutions, This is the only way to make sure that that the process of European construction continues. Ladies and gentlemen, intermediate local authorities, wherever they are, have an extremely important role to play in dealing with a number of challenges that touch the lives of ordinary citizens, and they have the necessary authority and competence to take up these challenges. These include a wide range of authorities. Now, I would like to just recall 2 articles of the European Charter of Local Self-Government ratified to date by 44 of 47 member states of the Council of Europe, specifically Article 4 and Article 5. We think that the administrative reforms anticipated in the course of or planned by certain member states of the European Union do not take into account the principles of democracy enshrined in the Charter, even though these states have ratified it. And we would like to express our concern with respect to the future of local intermediate authorities, taking into account the way certain member states are dealing with these authorities, given their important role as intermediaries in the overall architectural framework of these member states. In this context, the Confederation welcomes the opportunity offered by the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities to discuss the draft resolution on the role of local intermediate authorities in Europe. Now, the Confederation is sure that the results of such a debate will provide a reply and a very strong message with respect to issues related to development at the appropriate territorial level, based on a principle of subsidiarity and an approach based on the best possible principles of economic and social cohesion, both within a territory and amongst various territories, based on good governance between responsible partners that could strengthen the coherence and cohesion of territorial projects at different levels. We think that each territory is unique and has to cope with challenges and opportunities that are determined by its history and its geographical location. The best way to ensure its sustainable development is to ensure that its system of governance corresponds to its specific local circumstances. Now, in spite of the differences of the way European systems are organized, intermediate local authorities provide concrete input to dealing with major issues in the area of social policy, employment, environmental policy, transport, education, and other areas. They're often responsible for provision of services related to healthcare, education, housing, water supplies, emergency relief, etc. Therefore, we think that these administrative levels should be further strengthened rather than done away with in order to cope with these very urgent matters. Consequently, intermediate local authorities are a vital part of European governance, and they have the legitimacy to organize a cross-cutting process of governance that involves different local stakeholders brought together to achieve common goals. By the same token, they imply putting into practice a principle of subsidiarity by playing a key role by ensuring a broad coordination between different levels of government. Now, in Romania, the 41 departmental councils are public authorities at local level that coordinate the activities of the councils of towns and cities aimed at ensuring public interest at the departmental level in such areas as infrastructure, transport, culture, education, healthcare, teaching, education, protection of children and elderly people, social inclusion, protection of the environment, urbanization, and territorial planning. The 8 developmental regions in Romania were set up in 1998 with the aim of coordinating regional development that it would be that was necessary to become a member of the European Union. They correspond to the level of NUTS 2 of the European Union, but while their importance is quite significant in regional development, these regions don't have any administrative status. In 2011, the President of Romania requested that a administrative and territorial reorganization of Romania be carried out. This proposal has not led to concrete decisions yet. Now, I have submitted this written form of this report. In conclusion, the National Union of Departmental Councils of Romania is ready to take part in a discussion on administrative reform in Romania. We consider that the essential role of intermediate local authorities is very important, given the vertical coordination of local authorities within a state that ensure territorial, social, and economic cohesion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. COSMA. The debate is now open, and the first speaker that I have from the CEPLI that I indicated earlier is Mr. Fiasella. Mr. Fiasella, the floor is yours, please.
I'm very grateful to the Congress for providing this opportunity. I'm grateful twice over because this process of reform, which is going forward, and this will be the last time that I'm present here, if this happens, because, as I said, we may be done away with because we will no longer have representatives from the intermediate local authority, from the second tier of government, and so therefore it would be my last time if we are indeed done away with. And I have to say that I'm someone who passionately defends political issues in Congress because over those last few years, I have to say, we have seen that the European Union has had its shortcomings, and it's very difficult to create the agreements within the European Union. We think about the agreements of Frascati, and we think how difficult it has been to be able to shore up in a very secure way this whole system. If we say there are 500 million people, well, what a force that is, what a power that is, and that could be a very tremendous contribution to our culture. Now, if we look at the way in which the situation in the world has changed, of course that's true. We do realise that there are certain shortcomings with regard to the European Union in order to be face up to the recession, to the crisis which is affecting the whole world. Now, of course, we've understood that. Okay, fine. We've got to understand that dimension of Europe as well. Europe, of the regions, the geographical, if it were, the geographical dimension of Europe. And I think that today we have to look at the European Union and see how much bigger it is. How are we able to attain the objectives which we have, which are so ambitious? That is because creating participative democracy through one of our own countries, which is the member countries, the 11 member countries of CEPRI. And we have to look at this. And this is an organization. Look at the other countries. It's a very difficult job of work that we're doing. It's very hard to do it. And the Congress has been working very hard over the last few years, and I'm very grateful to it, because in every country, in the latest countries that you've joined, to understand the whole question of democracy and be able to move democracy a few steps forward. Now, look at the discussion. At the moment, we are talking about the present situation, which is characterized by an economic recession. Well, I mean, it's perfectly true that in the immediate, of course, you can't solve economic matters at the stage of progression, and that is for the objectives. We are trying to have a truly democratic Europe everywhere. But I mean, if we think that we are involved in this crisis, I mean, you never solve it by just giving up some democracy. I mean, it's too bad. I mean, what about my situation? It isn't that it will be affecting me because I'm president of my association, my province, and so on. We've got to look at it in a broader context. We've we've got to think about a very valuable asset, and one which is indivisible and one which is shared by everyone, because this is where Europe was born. We have this culture starting from Hellenic cultures based on participation, and this is shown through a vote, through voting, and if we look about nobility and if we consider it to be served by the purpose of searching for truth, well, we have to say, for heaven's sake, let us praise democracy. And we look at this situation. These are questions which last week we were discussing within the Assembly of the Latin Association, the Italian, some of the Latin, some of the French provinces and Italian provinces as well, and we were talking about the representatives of this area and the CEPLI, which is of course working towards this. And what should we do? Should we just bury it under the sand because there happens to be a recession on at the moment? I mean, surely we should realise that it's making a different and alternative contribution. Of course, we are involved. We are involved in this matter ourselves. We are some of the actors as well. But we have to look at an alternative. How can you possibly rationalise this system in Italy and other countries in which we are now discussing today? Well, what we have got to have is good public administration. Of course, that's what we need to have, something which doesn't cost as much across the board as well. And how can we try to resolve that situation by cutting away part of the structure? This Europe, this ambition, which we are in the process of building with the agreement of these 46 countries, I mean, it can be done by reaching agreements between local authorities, between the different identities. But it's this collection of the different parts of the situation. I have to say, I welcome Europe. I welcome this whole situation. I have to say that this is part of a very rich mosaic, and this is something in which we must act. We have to have a situation where it would be very good if the Congress could make a statement to support our situation and not say, well, no, of course, the intermediate state of government cannot be dealt away with, but no, that it would be a loss if it were to be done away with, and it could be done perhaps at a lower cost, but without perhaps giving it up entirely. I think that we should look at it in terms of seeing certain things may have to be done if there is a crisis, yes, but if we look at the poor, of course, they're the ones that have certain demands, and when they have certain needs, we should have greater democracy, greater capacity for reacting, and this is very important if the representation is part of the choice that citizens have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that intervention. My next speaker is Mr. Goncharenko from the Ukraine. The floor is yours, please.
Merci beaucoup. Premièrement, je veux...
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to our rapporteurs. I'd like to say thank you because this question is one which is truly important. And I am quite certain that the existence of powers at local and intermediate level is very important for our local authorities. I would like to say this. But at the same time, I do think that, of course, the situation at the moment, the situation depends on the size of the country. For example, the situation is completely different in Slovenia, with a population of 2 million people, and in Ukraine, which has 45 million people, and Russia, which has many more million than that. And in Ukraine, we have a system of intermediate level government, and I believe, as Vice President of the Regional Council, well, I have to say that I work very closely with the government levels in a time when we do have an economic crisis, I think we have to find the best possible combination of public services and of public expenditure. And I think that I hope that this report will help us, that it will help us to find this combination. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And next on my list, in fact the final speaker on my list, if there is anybody else who wants to speak, perhaps they could indicate, but it's Mr. Lamberts, please.
Yes, President, colleagues. I think that if there's anything that we can term as crucial for our Congress, then clearly that is the existence and development of local and regional democracy. That is our very raison d'etre. This is why we are here. And that is what is special about us. That is exactly what we fight for every time we have concerns about the situation. It's also true that the internal organization of a state is a matter for the state concerned, and it is not the job of the Council of Europe to tell states how they should organize themselves, unless those states have freely agreed that certain standards ought to be met, and that is the case of the Charter of Local Self-Government and the reference framework for regional democracy. That, of course, is another instrument along the same lines, although it has not yet reached the same level of progress as the Charter of Local Self-Government. So from time to time, countries, of course, start reorganizing local, regional or intermediate levels of government. And whenever they do so, I think it is incumbent upon us to keep an eye on the process, because we, after all, stand as the guarantors of everything that happens in that regard. And I think that we would be well advised to be very watchful, because often states embark on this reorganization exercise to call into question local and regional government, and can often be hugely disruptive to the delivery of local and regional government. In this present case, we are faced with a particularly complex set of circumstances. We know what local authorities are, roughly, in Europe, and we also know, more or less, perhaps less than more, what regions are. And, of course, it's important that we draw a distinction between the two. That is important, for example, in the organization, the structural organization of this Congress, and it's important in terms, for example, of our Charter of Local Self-Government. So these intermediate authorities are a real headache. Do we classify them with the local authorities or with the regional authorities? Now, this is not simply an academic exercise. This is not simply a matter of concern for those writing doctoral theses. I think that there is an awful lot of stake when we're trying to identify the differences between these different tiers of government, and that is why the Governance Committee is extremely keen to have in its possession this report, a report that it hopes will shed light on what this intermediate level of government is, and in all likelihood that intermediate level will belong with the local authorities rather than with the regional authorities. But in this Congress, of course, we wish to confer special significance on the concept of multi-level governance. And our notion of multi-level governance is quite different to the way in which it is understood within the legal order of the European Union. And that is why we would also want to include the supralocal or intermediate level of government, because it is so very important. And other speakers in the debate have said that an awful lot of aspects of public governance are being called into question at the present time, and that is why I think it would be well advised to pay very close attention to this issue. We're having a very first discussion of it here in the plenary, but I'm certain that we will look at it in much greater detail once we are presented with the very interesting report that is in the pipeline.
Thank you very much indeed, Karl-Heinz, for that. And the final speaker on my list is Mr. Monisi from Italy. Mr. Monisi, please.
Grazie Presidente. Io vorrei portare il punto
Thank you very much, President. I would like, if I may, to share with you the view of a mayor. I know that we have heard from various individuals who do work at the intermediate level, but what I wanted to do was to stress that there are all kinds of issues and problems surrounding the intermediate level of government, and perhaps it is the right tier of government for dealing with certain issues. I mean, I shan't go into them all here and now, but certainly I would echo some of the comments made by my colleagues. But if I may, just to give you a couple of examples, such as town planning and transport, there I believe that in Italy we are faced with all of these issues, and they have to be dealt with in their proper dimensions. But I think that other speakers have also endeavoured to sound the alarm, because in more general terms, and increasingly, I'm sorry to say, we wonder about the purpose of reforms. I don't think there's so much looking at the proper interrelationship between the different tiers of government. Rather, we need to look at the reasons being advanced for this wholesale reorganization of the state. And as I say, unfortunately, the main reason that is given now is the cost. And all too often, this is termed in Italy, unfortunately, the cost of politics. And so I think in this way, this kind of reorganization becomes problematic for democracy, because if you're only carrying out this exercise for the purpose of making cuts, then that is not going to generate any kind of organic solutions. Rather, simply, you are going to do away with systems for civic representation, and that is going to lead to greater levels of disconnect between the different tiers of government, different institutional levels. So this is a real problem for democracy. Now, a lot of people fail to highlight the real savings that could be made as part of a reform process. So I think that from this standpoint, it's very important that the Congress highlight such important issues. And the reason it is important is because, as I say, in more general terms, we are going to continue to experience the same difficulties we are experiencing now. And on many of occasions, we have heard here that the whole issue of financial resources is one which is absolutely crucial to this Congress. We are sometimes secondarily elected representatives in this organization, but mostly we are directly elected representatives of local and regional democracy in the member states of the Council of Europe. And we need this opportunity to express our views. There have to be genuine organic reforms, and not only these reforms which are designed to generate savings, which all too often are not even any kind of a saving.
Thank you very much indeed. I am generous, so I will give the floor just to one more speaker, which is Mr. Torres Pereira from Portugal. Mr. Pereira, Arthur, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout simplement pour me féliciter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to express my satisfaction with the report that has just been presented by Mr. VERRENGIA. As far as the intermediate level of governance, now why I'd like to express my satisfaction, why do I think we all should be very happy with this report? Now, we heard the representative of the British presidency make an appeal,
added value for the money,
appeal for added value for the money, taking advantage of as much as possible of expenditures. And I think the crisis that we're experiencing in Europe certainly deserves or forces us to think about the resources that local and regional authorities have to cope with this crisis. Indeed, tomorrow a round table is planned at 2:30 p.m. on the impact of the financial crisis. Now, on the one hand, we have the financial crisis, we have some of the ideas that have been put forward at Lancaster House, and we need to examine whether local and regional authorities should become the victims of the financial crisis, or whether, quite to the contrary, they have to be seen as full-fledged partners of the state, of the government, to deal with this financial crisis. Now, personally, I am strongly convinced that local authorities have a vital role to play in coping with this crisis, in close partnership with governments. But of course, they have to carry out the necessary reforms, including at the institutional level, and this is reflected in the report on good governance that in the report presented by Mr. VERRENGIA. And it is unfortunate that we don't have the opportunity to convey to the Committee of Ministers, we'll have that opportunity sometime in the future, to convey to the committee that local authorities want to have a closer partnership with governmental authorities to cope with the crisis, and that they have been, they're ready, they're willing, they've been ready to engage in this partnership for a long time to cope with this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That now concludes our list of speakers. I will ask Mr. VERRENGIA, do you wish to say something further, or Mr. COSMA? You would like to, Emilio? Yeah? Okay, the floor is yours.
President, the debate, I think, is very much in line with what is said in the report, I have to say, but I would just like to state once again that local authorities and not outside the crisis, which affects us all. We have got to organize the machine of local authorities in a flexible way. We've got to, they've got to be included in, and I think that, as Mr. Lambert was saying as well, we have got to see who does what, what the various competences are at various levels of the institutions in the different member states. And so I think that this is an objective. And then there's another point I would like to make, and I'd like to thank the Committee of Regions, because we had a meeting on the 14th in Brussels talking about the question of responsibilities and resources which should be allocated to the authorities, and the question of the tentatives or the attempts to reform the situation, which we're noting at the present moment in time, before these levels of government are done away with. I believe that this would be a weakening in fact, it would be a way of removing the content of the Charter if the resources are removed. And so, therefore, the whole principles, I feel, the reforms, of course, must be shared by the different organizations of local authorities, but you can't have reforms without covering all of them. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That closes the debate. We don't have any votes because, of course, this is ongoing work. Emilio, thanks very much for raising this issue and seeing the issue through. I think it is very important, and we look forward to your full report at a future session. Can I also thank you, Mr. COSMA, for your intervention. I hope that between the Congress and the Committee of Regions, we will continue to work in partnership on this issue to take that work further forward. So thank you very much indeed for your interventions, and thank you to all of the speakers in the debate. We will in a moment move on to the report on local elections in Bulgaria. I'm going to ask Mr. Frekon to come forward now to chair the session on the local elections in Bulgaria, because I do have to leave for some meetings. So thank you. Jean-Claude.